Moderns and Ancients, the Great Divide. We are raised today to assume that there is no such thing as a great divide between moderns and ancients. Why not? Because we live in the context of an evolution that ties everything together in a flux, which, of course, tends to be progressive, in other words, moving toward the future, and potentially or tendentially leading us to a more sophisticated, perhaps better society. Who would want to return to ancient societies? In any case, it's impossible because the forces of evolution have brought us here. And so all we have left to do is either embrace or stubbornly, try to resist and fail to resist the forces of evolution. Take, for example, biblical resistance to the status quo. That is simply foolish. But let us see what the roots of this doctrine of evolution are. Is the doctrine of evolution, justified? Is it perhaps a way to justify something else? An anthropology, a vision, a particular vision of the human being, the human condition. Let us consider the modern world, right, in its essential constitution. Well, we are raised in a modern context to assume that we're moving, and this is what life is all about, really, from our subjective feelings, the heart, the self, who is a kind of autonomous individual, somewhat in a bubble, and outside of the political stream, the public life, action, as a matter of fact, we live in a little dream world. We are to enter into the public sphere. So we're educated to abandon somehow our childhood and enter into manhood, adulthood, right? And so enter into the realm of action. Now, what's the point of action? Action is to realize our dreams. In our subjective state, we dream, we have wishes, we have values, all kinds of autonomous fantasies even, And these are supposed to be realized, or at any rate, we are to try, each one of us is to try to realize a dream, his own dream. Who is to tell me that my dream is wrong or bad or not as good as anybody else's dream? It's good for me. It's my dream. It's my fetish. It's my pet. So I have my pet. My pet vision. I want to realize it in the public sphere. So we're all in competition to do this. Right. Competition, of course, in an arena. Now, this arena, of course, is functioning according to certain regulations. It has parameters. It has, rules. So that my attempt to realize my own dream should not impinge upon your attempt, ideally. Well, the term ideal is crucial here. The ideal is transposed onto the society. In other words, we are to work all together to establish the society in which we can all do that. We can all subjectively try to realize in an objective fashion our own petty dreams. For us, they're cherished ideals. So we're going to realize our ideals. And ultimately, we will find out that our ideals converge into the establishment of a society that essentially allows us to realize our dreams, our pets. Now, these dreams that we realize are to be managed, governed within the sphere of the new society, which turns out to be a kind of matrix. In fact, a video game of sorts. When kids are given video games, they're being trained to live in a video game. What is the video game of ordinary life today? Which is mediated by the mass media, the internet, and all the other gadgets and machines of mass propaganda and mass mental manipulation. Well, this matrix is the objective form of all of our dreams. And so it, in fact, helps us dream. We could even go as far as saying that it feeds us our dreams to begin with. In other words, it wants to guarantee that all of our dreams fit perfectly well in the machine. And so it will inform our dreams. And this is what the entertainment business is all about. It keeps us detained within the matrix. Right? So we can have all kinds of opinions, the wildest opinions. As long as they fit, or they're made to fit in the matrix, they're fine. You can have neo-Nazi opinions. By all means, the whole Matrix project is a neo-Nazi project, a mechanistic, fundamentally project. And of course, you can even criticize a mechanistic view as long as it's done in mechanistic terms. So we have all we need to do in nominalistic, pragmatic terms. All we need to do is shift the names. And so we are in a maze of words, and of course the maze is itself, integral to the matrix, right? So this is the situation we live in. How did we get here? Well, that's simple. Evolution. We have a doctrine of evolution. Now, in the 19th century, we had a crisis in philosophical terms, we could say. You had to justify the emergence of the modern enlightened self. And Kant had a hard time doing this. He tried. Then in comes, to make things quick here and simple, but that's pretty much what happened, in comes Hegel, or anyway, whatever he represented in terms of a movement. And Hegel says, well, we need to ground this new enlightened self. We can't appeal to nature or God, as Kant had shown, but we can appeal to, well, old nature anyway, static, we could say permanent nature. Nature is guide and providential and so forth. But we can appeal to a new nature as the forces of history, right? Nature that enters into history. So evolution, finally. So we can appeal to these obscure forces because they have a logic. We can decipher this logic. And ultimately, this logic that we will decipher based on our reading of everything that's happened in the past, all of our records, so we read the human now in a certain way, we will decipher this logic and see that, well, you see, now there is a reason why the modern enlightened self has emerged. And there is a necessity, therefore, right? There's a reason, there's a necessary foundation to the emergence of the modern self. There's something about the cosmic forces that supports the emergence of modern liberalism, of the modern self, modern rationalism, and ultimately the establishment of the matrix society, the great global open society, the video game, in which we are all free to dream within the machine. Right, so the doctrine of evolution is now, well, assumed to be simply evolution, which is to say it's taken for granted. It's real. We seldom realize, however, that evolution is originally a way to justify, it's a doctrine that justifies the modern self. Now, As long as we fall for this justification, we're likely to assume that there is no way out of the modern condition. What about the ancients now? Now, of course, given the modern evolution doctrine, given our taking it for granted, there is no such thing as a return to the ancients. There is no point to assessing the ancients as cut off from the emergence of the modern self. The ancients were potentially modern, right? Ultimately, they were born to be modern. Right? And ultimately, there is we look for the modern in the ancients, and then the rest is simply delusion. Right? They were potentially us. Whatever doesn't fit the matrix is simply excrement. So we try to reread the ancients, get rid of the excrement, and digest them, incorporate them in the matrix. This is what modern scholarship, when it turns to the ancients, is really all about. I mean, overall, that's what it's all about. There are extremely few exceptions. So let's be one of the exceptions here. And let's consider the ancients. Now, the ancients do not assume that we begin from little autonomous self, bundle of feelings, passions on their own. The human being is not a bundle of fashions that is quickly integrated in machinery of change into the public arena where we try to realize our dreams. How is this possible? That's not what man is in the ancient world. He's not trying to realize his dreams. Well, as it turns out, careful non-modernist reading of classical sources tells us that no, that's not what the ancients are about at all. In fact, quite to the contrary, we have paradigms of stories in antiquity that tell us that no, that's not a good idea. From Icarus to the Tower of Babel, and you could go on, but let us just focus on essentials here. The notion that some private fellow tries to realize his dreams is just frowned upon, right? The private guy who tries to realize his dreams is simply foolish. And we have loads of stories from classical antiquity and the Middle Ages that warn us against that attempt, the foolishness. Why is it foolish? Because there's no machine that guarantees the success. And so you end up with manifesting your foolishness, whereas the machine conceals the foolishness and turns it into a virtue. Right? But let us look at what the ancients actually stood for. Well, they stood for a human being that is born within the political public sphere. In other words, there is no individual that enters into the political sphere. We are by nature political. But that means that we are poetic, because the political sphere, the sphere of heroic action in principle, right, is a poetic mirror of the gods. So the gods are reflected in it. Not for nothing, we have Homer and all kinds of classical poetry, or historical accounts, as we might want to call them today, but in a non-scientific way. We have all kinds of accounts of the human situation, of what happens in human life, that are filled with the gods or the presence of the divine. The poetic is the human. The human is the poetic. The human world is a mirror of a divine world. So we need to reflect on this mirror lest we fall into oblivion, which is to say, abandoning the poetic, we enter into the state of barbarism, violence, an abomination, really. And so we take bodies as real in themselves as opposed to being shadows of minds. So poetic shadows, obviously, of the divine. So this is what we have. We have the poetic world, which is a world filled with dreams. So we don't try to realize the dreams because we're living the dream, right? But this dream, not in a modern sense where it stops there, we dream the dream in the matrix. No, we dream the dream to come out of the dream. Now, how do you come out of the dream? Well, you ascend to the divine. So, how do you do that? Well, through reflection. And so, the study of poetry, the study of language, reflection upon poetry, the poetic, so everyday life understood, conceived in poetic terms, points to, right, the ground of poetry, which is to say the divine agency or divine providence that grounds our human condition. Why is it that we're born in this dream world, this of poetic heroic action? We're not trying to realize again a dream. We are in that dream, but we have to come out of it. That's the point. And so we go to this realization through reflection of the inherence within the dream of divine providence. In the Middle Ages, we speak about active intellect, in Latin, intellectus agens, which is a rendering of the Nous Poieticos of Aristotle. At any rate, there is a mind, divine providence. So the ancients, in general, the canonical, what became the canonical, the good ancients, stood for this turn. This turn to divine providence as an agency at work in the constitution of our own life, and that ultimately calls us out of our life to return to that principle of intelligence. So, one could say, in practical terms, so what's the difference between the moderns and the ancients? Well, the ancients remain within the machine. And they keep dreaming, and they're at war in the service of the machine. The moderns, right? The moderns. The ancients. What about the ancients? The ancients will be at war necessarily because that's part of the dream world, but they're going to try to come out of it by pointing to the otherworldly, right? The divine. So there is no impulse to establish this ideal society in which we can all be at peace with each other. The whole human life and experience is seen as something you have to come out of. And then the question is, how do you come out of it? So you come out of it well or not well. Right? How do you die? So life is preparation for death and participation in death in the respect that you're learning how to die. You're learning how to enter into communion with the divine. So here we have the great divide. Can we live as ancients today? Yes, of course. Of course. And of course, that will mean that we're at radical odds with everything that is modern, including the modern gadgets that we use. So if we have to use them, we will be using them against the whole machine, the matrix, which of course will try to spot you, detect you, and ostracize you, keep you into oblivion, because there is a bin, there is a garbage can in which all kinds of noise is flushed to all manure, all feces, excrements. They're all thrown into the bin within the machine. So even on the internet, you will have perhaps sporadic flashes where you have some lunatics who is speaking against the machine, and so the modern machine, of course, and the modern setup and evolution. These are all the loonies, and you throw them into the bin, which is incorporated in the machine, so that's fine. We can still do that. As one Chinese once said, in recent decades, as long as the Chinese Communist Party has 80% of approval, it's fine with a minority disapproving. It's perfectly fine because it's perfectly integrated in the system. So this is where we stand. Now, for young people, evolution, it must be real, it must be true. Well, let us keep finally in mind that the ancients, both Plato and the Bible, are fully aware that there is what is permanent and what is changing. And so when they are considering reality, the universe, the city, the polis, they are the human condition, yes? They're considering both what is permanent and what is the permanent features of reality and what is changing, what is evolving, you could say. Not in the progressive way necessarily, although up to a certain point we need a development that is positive. But that positive development stops at a kind of moderation. You don't go past the human into the cyborg, for instance, and develop some kind of AI a la Lucy, that film that they came up with in recent years. Lucy, the new AI, new God that supplants the old God, and that shares wisdom in a USB, the little gadget there, the key that will enlighten all of us, so that we can move from the old machines to the ultimate machine. No, this is not, well, what we have in the ancients, obviously. And, evolution, if there is evolution, there is a kind of evolution, stops at the point where we have a human being who can now turn. Essentially, he is the animal who turns back to the principle of constitution of the poetic dream, the poetic universe. So he realizes that there are forms of intelligibility that mediate, not the machine, forms of intelligibility, questions, problems, permanent features of reality that mediate the constitution of these dreams. Dreams are kind of answers to the questions that are permanent. By questions, I mean in the classics mean disclosures of reality, right? So invitations, openings, right? Open up. When you ask a question, why, you open up. The mind opens up to the ground. So these ouvertures, right? These openings, let these answers out, right? They produce answers, but at the same time they invite the answers back to their ground. So there is radical incompatibility between the ancients and the moderns. We can be ancients in a modern context, but of course it is not easy. It is not easy because we are driven to assume that the matrix is our God. Right? Whether we say it in words or not, that's irrelevant. We live as if, right? And this as if, this life of pretense, is really what the modern world is all about. We live in the element of pretense. We no longer ask seriously, we do not understand Hamlet's question, to be or not to be, by which he meant the question is not what you look like. The question is whether you are or not a man.